Hello fellow collectors, I hope you are doing wonderfully well. Today I'm continuing on with my monthly series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month. And today we take a look at my July in film. I think I've mentioned before that I started a new job back in June, and it's just been pretty exhausting learning a new role and sort of getting to grips with all the changes that come with a new job, so my film watching and also my video making took a bit of a back seat for a little while. Thankfully though, I'm more or less settled now, and so I made a really good effort, particularly in the second half of July, to pick up my pace of film watching a bit, as I felt like I was starting to have a bit more energy and able to focus a bit more in the evenings, which was really great. July has also kicked off a bit of a season of revisiting films for me as well. I somehow always feel quite guilty revisiting films I've already seen when I know I have such a huge watch pile to get through. But one just led to another this month, and actually out of the 5 films I'll talk about today, 3 of them were rewatches. Anyway, that's more than enough of my rambling, so let's get right into it and talk about the best films I watched in July. First up, and we have Day of the Outlaw, a film from 1959 and directed by André de Toth. This one stars Robert Ryan, Belle Ives, Tina Louise, Alan Marshall, Venetia Stevenson, and the list just goes on. A fantastic cast for this one. This was a brilliant western, and a film that actually reminded me quite a lot of Key Largo with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. So if you enjoyed that one, I think this will be right up your street, as the story hits on some similar beats, though of course with a western setting here. So, we have a hard land full of hard men, where negotiating sometimes just isn't on the table. It's a case of my way, or let's let the guns settle it, when a disagreement crops up. Our story is set in a small town at the end of a trail, so to speak. There's no lawman or sheriff in this tiny place. The people themselves more or less maintain order, though 1 or 2 of our characters would say it's really them that do it, that have worked over the years to run out the criminals and make the place what it is. But with that has come an arrogance and entitlement, and that is what has led to our initial dispute that we are welcomed into the story by. And then things take off. I don't really want to reveal anything more of the story so as not to spoil anything here. I just had a wonderful time experiencing this without any foreknowledge, and I'd love for others to experience that sort of joy of discovery with this one as well. Suffice to say that this is a potent mixture of cruelty, control, passion and cunning. There is some absolutely nail-biting tension in this one, which will have you sat on the edge of your seat with your heart pounding. One particular scene was almost hard to watch, as the tension was so incredibly palpable, and you know that all it would take is the tiniest spark for things to then erupt. Robert Ryan, who is more or less our main character here, is simply superb. He is hard, ruthless, driven and smart, and you just have a sense of a fierceness that is barely suppressed in his character. And that's actually something that really interested me quite a lot in this film. It's really a film with a lot of unlikable characters, and that's often something that I really struggle with, is you can't really connect with anyone all that well in particular. But despite that, it was utterly riveting, and to me that's always an incredible feat for any director to pull off. I will say that I didn't love the ending here. I thought that it could have been significantly better, but there was some absolutely brilliant lead up to it. And overall this was pretty spectacular. I picked this one up as I'd just been wanting to check out some more westerns that the Masters of Cinema series had released, and I should have known going into it that it would be absolutely incredible. Highly recommended from me. Up next, and we have Dr. No. Of course, barring Casino Royale, really the first proper look at James Bond on screen, and the kicking off Sean Connery's tenure as the iconic spy. From 1962 and directed by Terence Young, this one stars, of course, Sean Connery, as well as Ursula Andress, John Kitzmiller, Joseph Wiseman, Zena Marshall, Jack Lord, Anthony Dawson, and of course, Bernard Lee as M. A really stacked cast for this first one. A few years ago I picked up the James Bond Blu-ray box set, as I'd been wanting to go through them all again. And, as it turns out, there were actually a few that I'd never even seen before, and some that I'd only caught bits and pieces of on TV over the years. and overall it was enormous fun to watch the entire saga of the Bond films, even if it was maybe a bit of a slog at times with some of the weaker ones. To my surprise though, during that watch through, Goldfinger, which had long been my favourite, went down a peg or two, and Dr. No shot right up to the number 1 spot where I think it still remains. I do often have a soft spot for the beginnings of series, but I just think this one in particular is such a great film. It's a perfect start that embodies everything that makes James Bond so engaging. And I just had a hankering to revisit it in July, so decided to crack open this slightly disappointing collector's edition and put it on, and I just had an absolute blast watching it again. There is more realism here to the story and to the acting, and that's something that I really like to see. James Bond has a normal house that he lives in that we get to see like an actual human being. He actually uses spycraft at moments in this film, like setting traps so he can see if anyone entered his room while he was gone, making it seem like he is actually doing a job. He's not invincible or some perfect soldier here. When he's on his own, at times it shows the limits of what one man on his own can do. You can't win them all. Also, he's not some perfect shot. I really like the scene where they're on the island and he's trying to shoot out the lights and tyres of the supposed dragon, and not only does he miss multiple times, but his failure leads to a savage death for one of the characters that us as an audience have really grown to care about. There are consequences in this one which ground it much more so than many of the later instalments. For most of the film, Dr. No remains this mysterious and ominous threat. He is set up really nicely by his minions being unwilling to talk and rather die or endure extreme pain without breaking their silence. So you know that he is clearly not a villain to be trifled with, and keeping his reveal until the third act I think works perfectly well. Connery himself is of course fantastic as James Bond, and I think is probably the crowd favourite for actors who have portrayed the character. What I can never get over though is how old he actually is here. Take a look at him and shout out a guess as to his age. I'll give you a second or two. Look at this man. Unbelievably, to me anyway, he is only 32 years old. 32! And I just can't believe he was so young. Anyway, my amazement at that aside, while he is often cool, calm and prepared, he sometimes admits that he's scared. There's a great scene where Ursula Andress's character says to him, "I'm glad your hands are sweating too." You get that sense that he is a great spy. He's been trained well, knows his business and can often get the better of his opponents. But he can't plan for everything, and at times he's beaten in reasonable ways, and at times it's clear that he gets lucky. Skill alone isn't enough. A good dose of luck is absolutely key, like the scene where his assassination is averted without him ever knowing about it. Anyway, I think I could wax lyrical about this wonderful film for a while longer, but I'll wrap it up by saying that this is a great Bond film, giving you all the Cold War espionage action that you could want, with a wonderfully over-the-top villain, some great female characters, specifically Zena Marshall's Miss Taro, and just a hugely fun ride from start to finish. Moving on, and we have the incredible film The Raid. From 2011 and directed by Gareth Evans, it stars Iko Uwais, Joe Taslim, Donnie Alamsyah, Yayan Ruhian and Ray Sahatapi. You can see that I am so lucky to have this absolute behemoth of a release that just came out recently from Umbrella Entertainment out of Australia. This thing is a monster and something that I immediately pre-ordered, as this is a film which deserves a great special edition like this. This film is absolutely mind-blowing. I haven't seen it in years, but I've loved it in the past, and my goodness did it live up to my memories and more. It makes you feel alive. I mostly watch films lying down on my bed, as my TV is at the foot of my bed, and I bet my heart rate was higher lying down and watching this than it is when I'm exercising. It is a non-stop, heart-pounding thrill ride. I felt exactly like Milhouse when he starts to play Bonesaw and all he's done is put his name in, yet he's having the time of his life. The story is simple enough. There's a tower block run by a drug kingpin and a squad of police that need to make their way from the bottom to the top to get him. There are of course a few flourishes and little added elements that really give the story some much needed heart and emotional resonance, but it's a pretty straightforward one. I often find that fighting in films can get pretty boring after a while, but I think the incredible direction of Gareth Evans is on full display here because he knows exactly when to pile on, exactly when to ease the pressure and give the characters and audience both a breath. And along with his stellar editing, he just gets the pacing 100% correct here and avoids any lulls or any possibility of boredom at all. It is a blistering pace, and it is of course super violent, with a few of those moments that make you go oof at a particularly surprisingly brutal outcome. But I mean that in the best way possible. We have guns, we have knives, we have hand to hand, and it kicks ass at every turn, and even has a few corridor scenes to rival the likes of Oldboy. The mad dog character, played incredibly by Yayan Ruhian, is simply superb. And the long fight with him is a thing of unrivaled choreographed beauty and savagery. It is just white-knuckling, riveting stuff, and a feast for the eyes and the ears. With parts where you can hear your own breath as you don't want to make a sound, and parts where you are almost shouting along with the madness. There are some absolutely superb shots in this as well, with some great camera work that puts you right in the action, though without being distracting like I find at times with some other action films. Also some beautiful slow and tension building shots as well that kind of draw beads of sweat on your forehead as you know something is about to go down. Can you tell that I love this? It is exciting, brutal and utterly riveting, written, directed and edited all by Gareth Evans. This is such a work of brilliance. Well, taking a breath and moving on, we change pace significantly here, and we have The Station Agent, a film from 2003 directed by Tom McCarthy and starring Peter Dinklage, Patricia Clarkson and Bobby Cannavale as our main trio of characters. I hadn't seen this one for well over 10 years, and I remember it was actually lent to me on DVD from an old friend of mine that I used to work with. He was a fount of film knowledge, and I used to love going to work and talking films with him. And he actually played a huge part in my cinema journey and introduced me to a huge number of films, including the likes of Blade Runner, for example, and of course this wonderful one here, The Station Agent. It was watching Neil's Movie Channel when he was going through his entire DVD collection recently that brought this one back to my mind as he showed it off, and I just knew I had to revisit it, so I picked it up. It's crazy that this one still has no Blu-ray release anywhere. I think this would be a perfect choice for a boutique release, so hopefully we'll get one day. This is an absolutely superb film. It's funny, it's quiet, it's sweet and uplifting. Peter Dinklage plays our main character here, a man called Finn who is a train enthusiast that works in a hobby shop. And he's someone that, because of his dwarfism, has to constantly put up with people's reactions to him. He's a man that is isolated to some extent by how others treat him and react to him, and when he loses what seems to be his only friend along with his job, he happens to inherit a small disused train house where an old station agent would have worked. And he hears from the lawyer that it's in the middle of nowhere, that there's nothing around there, and so of course he thinks that's perfect. A place where he can enjoy his solitude, keep his own company, where he won't have to deal with other people and their ignorance, and where he can continue to indulge his train interest. However, as is so often the way, he goes looking for one thing and then ends up finding something else entirely, as it's certainly not solitude or peace that he finds out in the middle of nowhere, but instead real friendship and community. Now, I'm not usually the biggest fan of Bobby Cannavale. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I certainly don't dislike him, but I just often feel like he's not quite right for many of the roles that he's in. But here, he absolutely shines. It is the perfect role. He's just got that great New York chatter and swagger, and he hilariously just won't leave Finn alone, and keeps trying to make friends with him because he's also lonely. There is a great scene where he asks Finn what he's doing, and Finn says, "I'm going for a walk." And he says, "Can I come along? I'm a great walker, bro." And it just cracks me right up. He had some of the most hilarious lines in this one, and he does a wonderful job. Peter Dinklage is of course fantastic as well. He's an actor that I really like, and he's in another film that I love called I Think We're Alone Now, where he stars alongside Elle Fanning. And it actually shares quite a lot of similar themes to The Station Agent. Dinklage is just always such an engaging actor to watch. He's got a superb screen presence and is able to convey so much without all that much dialogue. Just a stellar performance that is full of emotion bubbling just under the surface for him. And then of course we have Patricia Clarkson rounding off our trio with her clumsiness, which often ends in hilarity, and the flip side to her character, who is struggling in her personal life as well. And so we have three people, all lonely in their own way, that come together here, and it's just beautiful to watch. There are more than a few laugh out loud moments, and there is a great thread of humour woven throughout this one, despite it touching on some heady themes like loneliness, isolation, familial breakdown, social exclusion, and more. Just a wonderful film that deserves your attention if you haven't seen it yet, and here's hoping that one day Criterion or Imprint or Radiance perhaps might be able to give this one the type of release it deserves. And then last but not least we have the original Superman. It's from 1978 and directed by Richard Donner, and it stars the legendary Christopher Reeve, Marlon Brando, Margot Kidder, Ned Beatty, Valerie Perrin and Gene Hackman. I have the lovely steelbook release here from the equally lovely big steelbook box set that was released a while back and that I was very lucky to pick up second hand for quite a reasonable price. Now this was a first time watch for me. I'm sure I've caught snippets here and there over the years of this one, but I don't think I'd ever seen it from start to finish. And actually now that I've also watched Superman 2, I think that was the one that was actually on TV more often, so this was a really wonderful journey to take properly for the first time. But despite that, and before I get into my thoughts on the film, I have to talk about the music and the score. Oh my goodness, this was exceptional stuff from John Williams at his absolute peak. During the intro, I already knew the theme tune without ever having really seen this, and I couldn't help but hum along. It is an absolute auditory joy that is so uplifting, and it sets you in the perfect frame of mind for the film to come. There is just a fantastic sci-fi hue to this one, particularly for the first parts on the planet Krypton. I loved the design and the costumes where everything looked futuristic and very otherworldly. I know he doesn't really do an awful lot. I really like Brando as Jor-El as well. And there's also great casting for a young Clark played by Jeff East, who gave such a wonderful introduction to him as a character brimming with this youthful enthusiasm and exuberance. I was a little bit surprised though at how little his parents, Jonathan and Martha, were involved though. I guess having seen Smallville and vaguely remembering the Superman TV show with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, I was just expecting them to have a bit of a larger role, but still really interesting to see Glenn Ford here. Something that I really liked about the story though is that when Clark comes to the Fortress of Solitude when I think he's about 18 and he begins to explore his origins and get some training from Jor-El, he learns for a period of 12 years, though only a few years pass on Earth, and so we never have anything like Superman Year 1 like there was for Batman, where he's making mistakes and learning how to become a hero. I really liked the fact that Superman would have already known how to control his powers and to be a real hero before he actually really started saving people. I also thought the introduction to Metropolis was fantastic, as Clark starts his life there as the bumbling and slouching Clark Kent. He's so clumsy and so polite, and it's just a really great persona to watch that Christopher Reeve pulls off effortlessly. One of the things I wasn't a huge fan of though was Lex Luthor. I'm not really a fan of Gene Hackman at the best of times, but it wasn't really anything even to do with him here, and more just the way that the character is portrayed. I felt like most things in this film were quite light and also had a bit of an air of realism about them. But considering Luthor's introduction to the film, which is incredibly dark as he cold-bloodedly murders someone, he then turns into this ultra-farcical comic book character, and it just kind of felt like he was acting in another film. It just didn't balance for me. He even has a bumbling sidekick rather than like a dangerous crony like it surely should have been. Perhaps this took too much inspiration from the comic books, I'm not too sure. But the sheer joy that this film gives, for that I can happily suspend my disbelief and accept him as he is. Despite the rating that I gave this one, which on Letterboxd was a 4 out of 5, that was a fairly generous rating, and more so for how the film made me feel and the air of wonder and positivity and justice and right prevailing. I do actually think that this should have had perhaps another 5 or 10 minute section where Superman becomes more widely known, where he's saving people and stopping disasters and becoming a mainstay in people's lives, as it just seems to happen a bit too easily and too quickly. And also importantly, so that Lex could get to know him and his reputation well enough to begin to hate him and then want to kill him. That seems to happen at the drop of a hat and just felt a bit contrived for the story. And there were a couple other parts I didn't quite love either, but I don't want to mention them as they might spoil it for anyone who, like me, might not yet have seen this film and still wants to. All in all, it just makes me long for a time when heroes were heroes, where things weren't always so morally grey and dark like the modern versions are today. Good was good and evil was evil. Superman is an ideal. He is something to aspire to, someone to look up to. He is a symbol of justice and right and a source of good, and I just absolutely loved it. I was uplifted and transported to another world for a while, and it was glorious. And lastly then, we are on to my honourable mentions list. And first up we have The Masters of Time, a sci-fi animated feature from the great René Laloux. Of course, because I forked out for this expensive and long out-of-print DVD from Eureka, you can clearly all thank me for taking that bullet, meaning that we are now getting a 4K from Criterion at some point in the near future. This was a wonderful film though, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and really I can't wait to watch Gandahar now, Laloux's other film, which I hope we get at some point soon with some English subtitles. And then we have Father Goose, which was a light-hearted comedy set during the war with, as usual, a hilarious performance from Cary Grant. Next is Pushover, which I feel like I just watched at the wrong time. I just had the feeling that this would be a really good one, but I just wasn't really in the right frame of mind, so it's one that I'm keen to revisit already. It was a great film noir, very dark and a slippery slope of a film with Fred MacMurray and Kim Novak. Then we have a rewatch for me, which was Out of Sight, but my first time getting to enjoy the 4K courtesy of Kino Lorber. And then finally we have The Great Race, which was a lot of fun. It does lull a little bit during one particular section in its almost 3-hour runtime, but this was consistently funny, making me laugh out loud an awful lot. A great cartoonish racing film with Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, Natalie Wood and even Peter Falk. And well, at last that brings us to the end of the video and my July in film. A pretty wonderful month of watching overall. I hope your July was also a great one, full of great films, and I hope your August has been going wonderfully well too. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.